We're continuing in chapter 11 of Hílchot Melachim, Hamotechem. Chapter 11 of the laws of king and of wars. We're in the fourth paragraph of chapter 11. We're going to take a look at this because it becomes very clear by the Rambam exactly what's the expectation of any potential Messiah. Va'im amod melech mebeit David. If, key word, if a king will arise from the house of David, if many of the house of Davids are no longer kings, they may have a tradition that they are royalty, but that doesn't mean that they are a king, a melech. If a king will arise of the house of David, in this halakha, the Rambam describes the stage in the revelation of the Messiah and the quality he must possess, not optional. Who is learned in the Torah, observant of the mitzvah, of the mitzvot, as prescribed by the written and oral law, meaning not only the written law, but also the rabbinical laws, as David, his ancestor was. Implied in the statement is that the Messiah will be born by a natural means. He will grow up and mature as a Torah sage, careful in observance and of doing mitzvot. Will compel all of Israel to walk in the ways of Torah and reinforce the breaches in its observance, uniting the Jews in the service of God. In other words, here we have a king, which obviously implies a person with a lot of wealth, a lot of financial support, not born in some type of makeshift house, poor and broken. No, that's not the Messiah that the Torah speaks about. Talking about a person of influence, a person who is considered a king. What king do you know today that doesn't amass or have a lot of fortunes? Same thing with if a king will arise in the house of David. You got to be very well off. Will compel all of Israel to walk in the ways of the Torah and reinforce the breaches in its observance, uniting the Jews in the service of God, and fight the wars of God. The uncensored printing of the Mishnah Torah includes the phrase defeating, not just fighting, defeating all the nations around him. Thus he will remove the immediate obstacles to the Jews' observance of the Torah and mitzvot. We may, with assurance, consider him the Messiah. In other words, only in such a situation can we consider the king to be the Messiah. However, his identity cannot be absolutely ascertained. In Hílchot Teshuvah, the Rambam relates that the Messiah will possess the prophetic powers that approach those of Moses. However, in the present context, the Rambam does not mention these abilities because he desires emphasis on Messiah's achievement as a Torah leader and not in his greatness as an individual. If he succeeds in the above, in other words, he's basically bringing people back to God. He is basically compelling them, inducing them, encouraging them, influencing them to do what God's commandment to do, uniting the Jews in their service of God. And then there's the added part. And fight the wars of God. This is not a poetical expression. It means an actual fight the wars of God, which means the eliminations of the Amalekite. It means the eliminations of the enemies of physical Israel in the physical land. Not the spiritual mitzvah tank that you see out there. Oh, he's fighting. No. Don't spiritualize what is literally to be taken. We may with the assurance consider him the Messiah. However, his identity cannot be absolutely ascertained. The Rambam then relates that the Messiah will possess prophetic powers in the approach to those of Moses. He will be able to do nevuah, predict, prophesy, all of that. However, in the present context, prophetic powers that approach those of Moses. However, in this context, the ability is because his desire to be able to demonstrate that he's the Messiah, not by what miracles he happens to perform. He's a Torah leader. Everything is Torah for him. If he succeeds in the above, he then builds the temple. Key aspect. Builds the temple. The Rambam sources the Yerushalmi Talmud and Megillah in chapter 1, verse 11, and in Numbers Rabbah, chapter 13, verse 2. By contrast, Rashi and the Tosafot in Sukkah 41a in the Midrash Tahuma and Pekadei maintains that the third temple is the sanctuary of God established by your hands. It is already completely built and just waiting in the heavens to be revealed. In other words, spiritually speaking, it's done. The third temple already exists. It's a matter of bringing it down in a physical reality by physically building the temple. So here's where I say that it's even possible that even the Messiah doesn't have to necessarily build the physical temple. We humans, we workers here are the ones required with that task. Later it comes imposed upon the building that's built. He will then improve the entire world, motivating all the nations to serve God together, as it states in Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 9, and I will make the peoples pure of speech, that they will call upon the name of God and serve him with one purpose. In other words, the way they speak doesn't necessarily mean that they speak Hebrew. It means that the purity, the way they contain their language, will be in a pure manner. If he did not succeed to this degree, in other words, to building the temple, I don't think the previous ones ever built the temple. Matter of fact, I know JC, they asked him, destroy this temple in 3 days, I will rebuild it. That was literal. Of course, later the writers invented their new application. He was referring to his body. Very apropos. When it doesn't fulfill to the literal sense, they have to look for a new way of applying it. Just like, oh, no, the temple is 770. And the parallels between the first and the second are so much, you have to laugh with me here. The parallels, so much. I will make the people pure of speech. Who will make the people pure of speech? The one who is speaking to the prophet. God will make the people pure speech, that they will all call upon the name of God to serve him with one purpose, one goal, one palpitation, as it were. If he did not succeed to this degree, in other words, by uniting the world to the belief in one God, to serve him and the idea of doing his commandments, if he did not succeed to this degree, he's not the Mashiach. Now you understand why so many of his emissaries are pushing the idea of B'nai Noach throughout the world. Although Rambam didn't push B'nai Noach. Rambam gave the non-Jews one choice. You convert. And if you don't want to convert, then at least keep the 7 Noachite laws. Keep a life of righteousness. Not like we see today. They're pushing the 7 Noachite laws everywhere. It's fine. Push it. Most of the people you're pushing it onto want to convert anyhow. What was behind this? He surely is not the Redeemer promised by the Torah. Rather, he should be considered as all of the other proper and complete kings of Davidic dynasty who died, which is what I consider the previous two. They passed away. They're not the Messiah. Move on. Next. God only caused him to arise in order to test the many. This is the hard part for many of the emissaries of this leader, this Hasidic emissary. Very hard for them. They don't want to accept the fact that they fall in this level which the Rambam mentions. that he passed. Your leader passed away. He died. God was simply using him to test Israel, to see if they were worthy, to see if the majority passed the test. Let me say this. I think the majority of Israel passed the test on both occasions. They didn't accept the one, but they're being still tested by the second one. You have to believe Yehi Adonenu Rabbeinu Morenu Melech HaMashiach Le'olam Ba'ed. You see a whole bunch of kids with the Mashiach now thing. By the way, let me say in commentary, that movement wasn't original in saying that. You can find that same expression being used about the first guy, JC, in the Syriac version of the Gospel of Matthew at the end of the chapter. In some of the most extant versions of the Gospel of Matthew Syriac version, it uses on the bottom at the end part. I saw that. I go, nothing new. It uses that same expression, but in Syriac. Interesting, no? In some of the wise men. So, what was the whole test about? It falls under chapter 11, verse 35 of Daniel. That God would cause him to arise in order to test the many, as stated in Daniel chapter 11, verse 35. And some of the wise men will stumble. Let me say this, in today's age, a lot of the wise men have stumbled. To try them, to refine them, and to clarify until the appointed time. Because the set time is in the future, not now. Obviously, I did a little alteration of I guess, an emoji that they sent to me. And it has Mashiach. They put there 5785. I simply changed it. You'll see it. I'll probably use it as the face of this cover. I put there, it says Mashiach, and I changed the date, but Mashiach 6000. Why? Because Hashem doesn't tell us when Mashiach's going to come or when he's going to be revealed. Just like a Hasidic rabbi, very involved in the simchas. I call him the Nanu of the Hasidic world, the Nanu. He came out and he said the Mashiach would be here. This was last year, I think it was 2 years ago, Rosh Hashanah. He will be here Rosh Hashanah. These big Kabbalists from Israel said it would be like this and it would be that. When you hear these people talk about quoting and citing Kabbalists are not prophets. They're making out them to become prophets, but they're not prophets. A lot of them are basically guessing. That's why I don't follow Kabbalists. Those who follow Kabbalists are like following fortune tellers. Very few are true spiritual insiders of what God is revealing. And thus it says, some of the wise men will stumble to try them, to refine them, to clarify until the appointed time, because the set time is in the future. Jesus of Nazareth, who aspired to be the Messiah, he wanted to be, he could have been, he should have been, he would have been, but wasn't, was executed by the court. Now, interesting is he mentions executed by the court because we know that the court did not execute him. This is a known fact, which seems to contradict what the Rambam is saying here. Anyone that has studied that history in that book knows that the court did not have the power to execute punishment of capital punishment. So I have to ask myself, Rambam, what are you saying here? Was executed by the court was also alluded to in Daniel's prophecy. Rambam, the courts did not execute it. Now, I may have made a legal decision that we got to do away with him. Okay, perhaps that's what you mean when you say the courts executed him. They put him aside. They turned him over. They did all of that. But the courts did not execute him. The courts did not have the power to deliver over for execution of their own execution system. And it's possible to understand this without understanding the history of what was going on. And for that, you need to learn a little bit of the history of the first century. And it's not necessarily something that should make Jews feel good. It was a horrible time in where Sinat Hinnom played a large part on turning over other Jews to the Roman magistrate, something that's completely prohibited in Jewish law, to turn over a fellow Jew to the Roman and secular authorities. Till this day we know that. But it says in chapter 11, verse 14, "The vulgar among your people shall exalt themselves in an attempt to fulfill the vision." Exactly what happened some years ago when they tried to force the vision, the Mashiach at 770 tried to force the vision of the leader being the Mashiach. Same thing. I tell you again, the parallels is insurmountable. I don't know why Rabbi Tovia Singer, knowing this, doesn't talk about it. The parallels in Jewish history till this modern age. Because obviously we know he doesn't want to upset that segment of the Jewish population because he will not support him. But when you're after truth, and you go after truth and you talk about truth, this is one thing that's got to be mentioned. "The vulgar among your people shall exalt themselves in attempt to fulfill the vision." What vision? The Messianic vision, to be able to establish the Messianic kingdom. "But they," says Rambam, "shall stumble." And I find in both cases, they did stumble. His identity cannot no longer be disputed. Once he has accomplished all that the Rambam talks about, we can be certain that the Messianic era will and has begun. But we can't now, because so far no candidate for the position has fulfilled these items. We're just here in chapter 11 still. No one has fulfilled by building the temple. No, we're not talking about a spiritual temple. We're talking an actual temple, the house of the Lord in Jerusalem. That becomes the key point of fulfilling a whole bunch of prophecies. He will then improve the world, the entire world. As stated in the Halakha, chapter 8, 10, the Jews are obligated to influence the Gentiles for the universal concepts of one God and the fundamental principles of faith imposed upon them. Are we doing that? There are many that are doing that, influencing the non-Jewish world. Motivating the nations to serve God together, as stated in Zephaniah. And by the way, when we look at Zechariah chapter 8, that does not refer to the B'nai Noach movement. It refers to people wanting to convert to Judaism, and this is why they're taking hold on the tzitzits. "I will make the people pure speech, that they will all call upon the name of God and serve him with one purpose." Isaiah 2, verse 2, chapter 2, verse 2. Prophecies in the final days, the mountain of God's house will be established. The mountain of God's house. This is what, for those of you that are going up to the mountain, this is some positive words of optimism. In the final days, the mountain of God's house, something that's been prohibited for Jews to be on the top of the mountain of God's house, prohibiting, taking them out of there, arresting them. That's going to be done away with. God's house will be established, and all nations shall flow to it. Just now you're understanding why my words to President Trump becomes of such an impetus, such a powerful call upon the President of these United States to take on that role. I mean, he already started here in the United States by calling a call to come back to God, to religion. He said that already. Just needs to go one more step. Say it to all the nations regarding Israel. He does that. These fulfillments of these words that we read in the Rambam will become materialized. That's why I get excited. And all the nations shall flow to it. Where? To the house of God. When people start building the house of God in Jerusalem, they are building and rebuilding and constructing the reparation of the damage that the nation of Rome did against the Jews. And that's called tikkun. It is in the hands of the nations to begin the construction and to participate in the reconstruction of the house of the Lord. Now let me ask my fellow friend, co-religionist, pastor, if this doesn't put any fire under your feet, what will? You are to be able to start working and helping and calling others to rebuild the house of the Lord that we Gentiles destroyed. I love it. You have to be excited for this. Here we find clear indication, both in the prophets and in the Rambam, that the Gentile world should help the Jews rebuild the temple. They have an active participation to build the house of the Lord, because it is there that all the nations of the world will come flowing to it to seek what? To seek God. Though not published text, the Mishnah concludes this chapter with this paragraph. A large portion of the Rambam's text was censored and left unpublished. We've included this original text based upon the Yemenite manuscript of the Mishnah Torah and the earlier uncensored edition. In this version, the above paragraph is found in the midst of other passages describing Christianity and Islam. I'm going to pause here because we're going to continue. We're not going to just leave it there. There's much and much more. You're seeing how everything slowly is going towards the center of the idea of putting away the false notions of Messiah potentials or potential Messiahs or Messiah potentials that didn't make it in our history. And now you're starting to see the real one, how it's going to shape up, how it's shaping up even in regards to the nations of the world. Stay tuned. There's more about this coming in our next video.